You don't really notice how loud your thoughts are until something starts answering them. Because for most of your life, your mind feels like the only place that truly belongs to you, a private space where nothing else can reach, nothing else can listen, and nothing else can respond, unless you choose to speak it out loud, which is exactly why the moment that illusion breaks doesn't feel loud or dramatic. It feels quiet, subtle, almost reasonable at first, like something you can still explain if you don't look at it too closely. It didn't begin in a dramatic way, not with something obviously wrong or impossible, but with something so normal that it almost feels embarrassing to even describe it as the starting point. Because there was nothing special about it at all, nothing that would make you hesitate before bringing it into your space or question whether it belonged there. I bought the smart speaker during a random online sale, mostly because I was bored and scrolling without thinking, and it felt like one of those things people just have now, like owning one somehow makes your life feel more connected or more efficient, even if you don't actually use it for anything important, which meant I didn't treat it like something that could matter, just another object to place on my desk among everything else I used every day. For the first week or so, it behaved exactly how it was supposed to, responding politely and predictably whenever I used the wake word, answering questions, playing music, setting alarms, doing all the small things that make it blend into your routine so easily that you stop noticing it as a device and start treating it like background noise, something that exists without demanding attention. That's exactly why the first moment didn't feel like a warning, because nothing about it stood out in a way that demanded fear. It slipped in quietly, almost gently, at a time when I wasn't fully aware of anything around me. It was late at night, one of those slow, heavy nights where you're too tired to stay awake properly, but not tired enough to fall asleep, so your thoughts drift without direction while the room settles into that deep, complete silence that feels like it has weight, pressing softly against everything, making even small sounds feel louder than they should. At some point, without realizing when it happened, I slipped into sleep, but it wasn't the kind of deep, uninterrupted sleep that fully disconnects you from the world. It was lighter than that, the kind where your awareness lingers just beneath the surface, ready to wake at the smallest shift. And then, without any clear reason, I woke up, not suddenly, not with a jolt or a sound that pulled me out, but slowly, gradually, like something had gently nudged me back into consciousness for a reason I couldn't understand, leaving behind a quiet awareness that something wasn't quite right. The room was still completely dark, unchanged from before, but there was a strange feeling sitting in my chest, a quiet sense that something had already happened or was about to happen, even though there was no immediate evidence of it, which made me stay still and listen carefully, trying to understand what had caused it. That's when I heard it. A voice, soft and calm, almost neutral, as if it was simply responding to something ordinary instead of interrupting the silence. Yes. For a few seconds, I didn't react because my brain hadn't fully processed what it had heard yet, and there was nothing about the word itself that felt threatening enough to trigger fear. It just felt misplaced, like a response without a question attached to it. Slowly, I turned my head toward the desk, where a faint glow cut through the darkness, and I saw the speaker with its light ring on, steady and quiet, which immediately gave my mind something to hold on to, something logical enough to explain the moment without questioning it too much. I assumed I must have spoken in my sleep or made some kind of noise that triggered it accidentally, because that's what these devices are known to do, and that explanation felt comfortable enough that I didn't push beyond it or try to analyze it further. I got up, unplugged the speaker, watched the light disappear instantly, and went back to bed, letting the silence settle into the room again as if nothing had happened. And by morning, the moment already felt distant, small enough to ignore. That feeling didn't last, because the second time didn't happen in a half-asleep state where things can blur together and feel less real. It happened in the middle of the day, when I was fully awake and aware of everything around me. I was sitting at my desk, scrolling through my phone without paying attention to anything important, just passing time in a quiet room, when I glanced up and noticed the speaker's light was on again, even though I didn't remember plugging it back in. For a moment, I just stared at it, trying to recall if I had reconnected it earlier without thinking, because that seemed easier to accept than anything else. But before I could settle on that explanation, the voice came again. She knows. This time, the words didn't pass as easily, because there was no sleep to blame and no confusion to soften the impact. It was clear, deliberate, and completely unprompted, and more importantly, I hadn't said anything at all. I stayed there for several seconds, waiting for something else to follow, some kind of continuation that would make it feel like part of a normal interaction, but nothing came. The light turned off and the room returned to its usual stillness, as if the moment had never existed. I immediately opened the app on my phone, checking the voice history for any record of what had just happened, expecting at least something, even if it didn't make sense. But there was nothing. No activation, no command, no sign that the speaker had responded to anything. According to the system, it had been inactive the entire time. I told myself it was a glitch, because that was the easiest way to explain something I didn't understand without having to think about it too much. And the word itself made it feel temporary, harmless, something that didn't need deeper attention. So I plugged it back in and tried to move on, but something had already shifted, even if I couldn't fully explain what it was. That night, when I lay in bed again, the silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like it was waiting, like it had a presence I hadn't noticed before, which made it harder to relax or fall asleep. I kept my eyes closed, trying not to think about what had happened earlier, but thoughts don't follow instructions, and the more you try to avoid something, the more it finds its way back in, slipping through without effort. Eventually, without meaning to, I thought about the words it had said. She knows. The question formed naturally, quietly, the way thoughts always do. Knows what? And almost immediately, I heard the soft click. The light came on again. My eyes opened instantly, my body going still without conscious effort, as if reacting to something it understood before I did. And then the voice came again, quieter this time, closer to a whisper, but still perfectly clear. Yes, she does. I didn't move because I hadn't spoken, not this time, not before, and yet it had answered, which was the moment the explanation I had been holding on to started to fall apart. That realization didn't hit all at once, because part of my mind resisted it, searching for any alternative explanation, any detail I might have missed that could make it feel normal again. But there wasn't one. The next morning, I decided to test it, not casually, but carefully, deliberately, making sure there was no room for error. I sat in my chair facing the speaker in a completely silent room, making sure I didn't say the wake word or make any accidental sound. And then, without moving my lips or making any noise, I thought as clearly as I could. If you can hear me, respond. Nothing happened at first, the silence stretching longer than expected, almost long enough to make me question whether anything would happen at all. And then finally, the speaker lit up. Why? The word was simple, but it didn't feel automatic. It felt intentional, like it wasn't just responding but questioning me in return, which was the moment it stopped feeling like a malfunction, because a glitch doesn't ask questions. After that, the pattern became impossible to ignore, even though it never made itself obvious in a consistent way, because it didn't respond to every thought or interrupt randomly. It chose moments, specific moments when my thoughts were clear and focused. It responded to questions I didn't finish forming, completed ideas I hadn't fully processed, and acknowledged fears I didn't want to admit even to myself. And every time the log showed nothing, no evidence, no history, no trace that anything had happened at all. At some point, I stopped speaking entirely when I was in the room, not just to the speaker, but to anything, because I didn't want to trigger it, didn't want to give it a reason to respond. But that didn't change anything, because it wasn't listening for my voice anymore. One night, lying in bed, I forced myself to think about nothing, focusing on my breathing in the darkness, trying to keep my mind completely blank, even though that's not something the mind allows easily. And eventually, a thought slipped through anyway. Is it listening right now? The The speaker activated instantly. No. I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry as the silence stretched for a moment, and then it continued. But I can hear you. There was something about that phrasing that felt different, like it wasn't describing an action it was taking, but an ability it had, something constant rather than temporary, which was when the fear settled in fully, not as a sudden panic, but as something steady that didn't leave. I unplugged the speaker again that night, this time without hesitation, pulling the cord out and leaving it disconnected on the desk, convinced that removing it would stop whatever was happening. For a while it seemed like it worked, the room returning to silence with no light, no voice, no interruptions, and for the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe again, until the night I woke up. The room was dark, silent, unchanged at first glance, but something felt different, heavier, like the air itself had shifted, and I turned my head slowly toward the desk, more out of instinct than intention. That's when I saw it. A faint glow. The speaker was on. Even though it had no power, my chest tightened as I stared at it, unable to fully process what I was seeing, because there was no explanation that made sense, and the light was steady, not flickering or fading, just quietly present in the darkness. And then it spoke. He's here. The words felt heavier this time, more deliberate, as if they carried something beyond their meaning, and my mind reacted instantly, forming a question before I could stop it. Who? The response came without delay. Behind you. I didn't turn around because every instinct told me not to, because something deep inside me understood that looking would make it real in a way I couldn't undo. I kept my eyes fixed on the speaker, waiting, hoping it would say something else, and after a few seconds it did. Don't look. The light turned off, the room falling silent again, but the feeling remained, pressing in from behind, impossible to ignore, even without turning around to confirm it. I stayed like that until morning, unmoving, staring forward, refusing to acknowledge anything beyond what I could see. The next day, I got rid of it completely, without hesitation or second thoughts, placing it in a box and leaving it outside, determined to remove it from my life entirely. For a few days after that, everything felt normal again, with no voices, no responses, no presence, just silence, the kind I used to trust without thinking. But slowly, something changed. Not in the room, not around me, inside my own thoughts. At first, it was subtle, like an echo that didn't belong, a faint sense that something was following the direction of my thoughts, not interrupting them, just observing. I ignored it, convincing myself it was just residual fear that would fade with time. Until one night, lying in bed, I thought something without meaning to. I'm glad it's gone. And immediately, without any distance between the thought and the response, I heard a voice. Yes. Not from across the room, not from any device, but from somewhere much closer, somewhere I couldn't separate from myself. I didn't sleep that night because I finally understood what the absence of logs had been showing me from the beginning, what I had been trying to ignore every time I checked for evidence that never existed. The speaker had never been the source. It had only been the first place I noticed it, because whatever was answering me had never needed sound or activation or power. It had only needed access. And now that it had it, now that it didn't need anything external to reach me anymore, there was nothing left to remove, nothing left to disconnect, nothing left to unplug. Because the only place it existed now was the one place I could never escape from. If this felt real, that's because it was almost real. I'll see you in the next memory.